My time in this chamber often gives me cause to reflect on our history and on the brave patriots who went before us, many of whom risked or even gave their lives to create this great republic. And today I'd like to talk about a group of men who 239 years ago tonight engaged in a daring act of defiance against the British Crown. For many of us, the Boston Tea Party is one of the first events we hear about in school on the road to our American Revolution. Growing up, we were taught the story of painted-up Bostonians dumping shipments of tea into Boston Harbor to defend the principle, no taxation without representation. Conspicuously missing from history books is the story of the brave Rhode Islanders who challenged the British Crown far more aggressively more than a year before Bostonians dumped those tea bags into Boston Harbor. Today, on its anniversary, I would like to take us back to an earlier milestone in America's fight for independence and to share with you the story of a British vessel, the HMS Gaspee, and to introduce to some little-known heroes now lost in the footnotes of history. In 1772, amidst growing tensions with American colonies, King George III stationed his revenue cutter, the HMS Gaspee, in Rhode Island. The Gaspee's task was to prevent smuggling and enforce the payment of taxes. But to Rhode Islanders, the vessel was a symbol of oppression. The offensive presence of the Gaspee was matched by the offensive manner of its captain, Lieutenant William Duddingston. Lieutenant Duddingston was known for destroying fishing vessels and confiscating their contents, flagging down ships, only to harass, humiliate, and interrogate sailors. But on June 9th, 1772, an audacious Rhode Islander, Captain Benjamin Lindsay, took a stand. Aboard his ship, the Hannah, Captain Lindsay set sail from Newport to Providence. On his way, he was hailed by the Gaspee to stop for a search. The defiant captain ignored the command and continued on his course. Recently, Dr. Kathy Abbas, director of the Rhode Island Marine Archaeology Project, has suggested a motivating factor for Duddingston to want to have seized the Hannah. She may have been carrying 250 pounds sterling on board. As Dr. Abbas told the Providence Journal, that was an enormous sum in those days. In any event, Captain Lindsay and his Hannah sought to evade the Gaspee. Gunshots were fired and the Hannah sped north up Narragansett Bay, with the Gaspee chasing behind in pursuit. Outsized and outgunned, Captain Lindsay drew courage and confidence from his familiarity with Rhode Island waters. He led the Gaspee into the shallow waters off Namquid Point, where the smaller Hannah cruised safely over the sandbanks. The heavier Gaspee ran aground and stuck. The Gaspee was stranded in a falling tide, and it would be many hours before high tide would lift her free. Arriving triumphantly in Providence, Captain Lindsay visited John Brown, whose family helped found Brown University. The two men rallied a group of patriots at Sabin's Tavern in what is now the east side of Providence. The Gaspee was despised by Rhode Islanders who had been too often bullied in their own waters by this ship, and the stranding of this once powerful vessel presented an irresistible chance. On that dark night, 60 men in longboats, led by Captain Lindsay and another great figure from Rhode Island Revolutionary history, Abraham Whipple, moved quietly down Narragansett Bay. They encircled the Gaspee and demanded that Lieutenant Duddingston surrender the ship. Duddingston refused and instead ordered his men to fire upon anyone who tried to board. The determined Rhode Islanders took this as a cue to force their way onto the Gaspee, and they boarded her in a raging uproar of shouted oaths, gunshots, powder smoke, and clashing swords. Amidst this violent struggle, Lieutenant Duddingston was shot by a musket ball. Right there, in the waters of Warwick, Rhode Island, the very first blood of what was to become the American Revolution was drawn. Victory was soon in the hands of the Rhode Islanders. Brown and Whipple took the captive Englishmen back to shore. You can go today down behind O'Rourke's Bar and Grill in Patuxent Village, down Peck Lane towards the water, and you can see the bronze plaque there commemorating the spot where the captured crew was brought ashore. The Rhode Island Patriots then returned to set the abandoned Gaspee on fire, and rid Narragansett Bay of this nuisance for once and for all. As the Gaspee burned, the fire reached her powder magazine, and she exploded like fireworks. The boom echoed across the bay through the night as the remains of the ship splashed down into the water. The Gaspee was gone, captured, burned, and blown to bits. The site of this historic victory is now named Gaspee Point. The wounding of Lieutenant Duddingston and the capture and destruction of the Gaspee occurred 16 months before the so-called Boston Tea Party. Perhaps this bold undertaking will one day show up in our history books, alongside pictures of the blazing Gaspee lighting up Narragansett Bay. Perhaps American children will one day memorize the dates of June 9th and June 10th, the night in which Benjamin Lindsay, Abraham Whipple, and John Brown led this violent attack on British rule. I do know that these events will never be forgotten in Rhode Island. Over the years, I've often had the occasion to march in the annual Gaspee Days parade in Warwick, Rhode Island, as every year we recall the courage and zeal of these men who risked it all to defend the freedoms that we enjoy today and who drew the first blood in what then became the revolutionary conflict. I thank the chair, and I'd add only that in the context of fires and disasters, we have lost one of the signature buildings of Woonsockett, Rhode Island last night. It was called the Woonsockett Rubber Company. The building was known as the Alice Mills, named after the mother of the president of the company who built it. It had existed for, 100 years or more. And it burned in a fire so great that 12 municipal fire departments had to answer it last night. Fire departments all the way from Wrentham, Massachusetts, down to Warren, Rhode Island. And I want to express my sympathies to the people of Woonsockett on this loss, and my pride in the firefighters who responded from so far and wide to attend to this fire. Unfortunately, the mill could not be saved. These mills are very hard to prevent fires in once they get burning, and we've lost something very precious in Rhode Island. And I just wanted to note that in addition to my remarks about the Gaspee. Let me thank very much my chairman on the Environment Public Works Committee. I know she has important business on the floor, and it was very kind of her to give me these few minutes to talk about this historic day in Rhode Island and American history. Thank you, Chairman Boxer. I yield the floor.